Stacy's workday started like any other at the fast food restaurant. Stationed at the drive-thru, she handed out orders to the usual lunchtime rush. But everything took a sudden turn when she heard a familiar voice through the intercom, her father's. Stacy smiled as she recognized the distinct tone in his voice. It was strange to hear him ordering fast food, especially since he was never a fan of it. Still, she felt excited to see him and made sure his meal was perfect. When her father, Mark, pulled up to the window, Stacy's smile quickly faded. He wasn't his usual self. Instead of the warmth she expected, his face was solemn, and he seemed to be holding back tears. Stacy, worried, asked, "What's wrong, Dad?" Mark hesitated before finally revealing something that left her shattered. "I'm leaving you and your mother." The shock hit Stacy hard. Confused and heartbroken, she tried calling him after he drove away, but her calls went straight to voicemail. Reality began to sink in. Her father was serious. Distraught, Stacy's boss noticed her distress and sent her home. But what awaited her there would only deepen the pain. But before we dive into the story, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our exciting stories. When Stacy arrived at her house, she was met with a scene of chaos. The drawers were pulled open and belongings were scattered everywhere. Her mother sat upstairs crying quietly while holding a picture. It was clear that Mark had come home and hastily packed his things, leaving without any proper explanation. Both women were left in a state of despair, trying to make sense of the sudden abandonment. As Stacy and her mother tried to comfort each other, the shock slowly turned into confusion and fear. Why had Mark left so abruptly, and why had he refused to explain? While they were still processing the situation, something even more unsettling began to happen. The phone started ringing, but when Stacy picked it up, no one spoke. Just heavy breathing on the other end. This unnerving pattern continued for days, with the mysterious calls becoming more frequent. One afternoon, while running errands together, Stacy noticed a black sedan following them. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but as they circled through a neighborhood, the car remained behind them. Both mother and daughter felt a growing sense of unease. When they returned home, the sedan was parked just down the street, with two men sitting inside. It was clear they were being watched. Desperate for answers, Stacy decided to call her father's brother, Larry, a police officer. She explained the situation, from her father's sudden departure to the mysterious calls and the black car following them. Larry, usually calm and composed, became alarmed when he heard about the sedan. He immediately asked for the license plate number, and after checking it in the police database, his concern deepened. The car belonged to a known criminal organization tied to illegal gambling and dangerous activities. Larry advised Stacy and her mother to come to his house right away. When they arrived, he revealed a troubling truth about Mark's past. Mark had always been impulsive, with a history of getting involved in gambling. Years ago, their father had to bail him out of trouble, paying off large debts to keep the family safe. Larry feared that Mark had fallen back into his old habits and was now running from people to whom he owed significant amounts of money. The realization was devastating. Stacy's father hadn't just left the family, he was likely in deep trouble with dangerous criminals. Stacy and her mother sat in stunned silence as Larry explained Mark's past. It made sense now. The frantic packing, the cryptic messages, and the mysterious sedan. Their father wasn't just running away from them, he was trying to protect them from something far more sinister. Larry assured them that he had a plan, but it would require careful handling. Larry showed them a large sum of money he had been saving, just in case Mark's gambling problems ever resurfaced. He explained that they needed to deliver the money quietly, without involving the police, to avoid putting Mark in even greater danger. Stacy and her mother, though terrified, agreed to the plan. Larry was confident that if they paid off the debt, they could stop the dangerous men from coming after Mark and hopefully bring him back safely. Not long after, the phone rang again. This time, Larry answered and spoke directly to the person on the other end. He calmly informed the caller that they had the money and were ready to make the exchange. The man on the other line, with a cold and menacing voice, gave them instructions. They were to meet at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town where the money would be handed over. The next day, Stacy, her mother, and Larry drove to the warehouse carrying the envelope of money. When they arrived, they were met by a group of intimidating men. One of them, clearly the leader, approached Larry, who handed him the envelope without a word. The man counted the money, nodded in approval, and signaled for them to leave. It seemed the exchange had gone smoothly, but as they turned to go, Stacy couldn't help but feel a pang of fear for her father. Would they ever see him again? Larry reassured them that now that the money was paid, Mark would be safe from these men. But the question remained, where was he? Larry had an idea of where Mark might be hiding and told them that they should take a trip to a remote cabin where their family used to go. He believed Mark was there, seeking refuge from the chaos he had created. Stacy, her mother, and Larry drove out to the remote cabin deep in the woods where their family had sought peace in the past. The drive felt long and tense, but Larry remained confident that Mark was there, hiding from the mess his gambling addiction had created. As they approached the cabin, Larry honked the horn in a specific pattern, something only family members would recognize. Moments later, the cabin door slowly opened and there he was, Mark, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down his face. Stacy and her mother rushed out of the car, running toward him, and they embraced in the middle of the clearing. It was an emotional reunion filled with hugs, tears, and whispered apologies. Mark was deeply remorseful for everything that had happened. He explained that he had fled not because he didn't love them, but because he was terrified for their safety. Larry watched the reunion, quietly wiping away a tear of his own. He finally spoke, telling Mark, "It's over now. The debt is paid, and you're safe." Mark thanked his brother profusely, knowing that without him, things could have ended much worse. After the emotional reunion, the family returned home together. Mark promised that he was done with gambling for good and that he would do everything in his power to rebuild the trust he had broken. He began attending support meetings to address his addiction and took on more responsibility around the house to be closer to his family. Stacy and her mother were grateful to have him back, but the scars of the experience lingered. Just when it seemed like life was returning to normal, another surprise came their way. A few weeks later, while having breakfast, a news bulletin flashed across the TV screen. It was Larry in his police uniform speaking to reporters. He explained that a major illegal gambling ring had been taken down, and the arrest had happened thanks to crucial evidence that Larry had gathered during the warehouse exchange. Stacy and her mother were stunned as they realized that Larry had been wearing a hidden camera the entire time. He had not only saved Mark from the dangerous criminals, but had also helped dismantle the entire operation. This news brought a sense of closure to the family, knowing that the people who had threatened their lives were now behind bars. The revelation about Larry's hidden camera and the successful takedown of the illegal gambling ring brought a sense of relief and justice to Stacy and her family. Watching Larry on TV speaking about the arrest made Stacy realize how brave her uncle had been. He had not only saved her father, but had put himself at great risk to ensure that the criminals were caught and couldn't harm anyone else. Mark, watching the broadcast with them, seemed to have a weight lifted off his shoulders. He turned to Stacy and her mother, expressing his gratitude once more. "It's over now," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "We can move forward." For the first time in weeks, the family felt a sense of peace. The constant fear and anxiety that had been hanging over them began to fade. Mark continued attending his support meetings and worked hard to rebuild the trust he had lost. He spent more time with Stacy and her mother, making sure to be present and supportive as they healed from the emotional turmoil. Stacy, though still processing everything, felt grateful to have her father back. She knew it would take time to fully trust him again, but his efforts were sincere. Slowly but surely, life started to return to normal. They shared meals together, laughed, and talked about the future. It wasn't easy, but they were committed to moving forward as a family. As the weeks passed, the black sedan no longer appeared outside their house, and the threatening calls stopped. The men who had once loomed over their lives were now behind bars thanks to Larry's brave actions. The nightmare was finally over. Mark kept his promise, staying away from gambling and focusing on being the husband and father his family needed. The experience had changed him, and he knew he had been given a second chance. He worked hard every day to make the most of it. Larry, as modest as ever, didn't dwell on the heroics of his actions. He simply told Stacy and her mother, "I did what any brother would do," but they knew better. Larry had gone above and beyond to protect them. In the end, the family emerged stronger. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and betrayal. But through it all, they found their way back to each other, and now they were ready to build a future free from the shadows of the past.